It's Vesak this week and Colombo's most famous temple, the Gangaramya, is abuzz, as you can see. This 19th century temple has an eclectic mix of Sri Lankan, Thai, Indian and Chinese architecture and is a repository of history and knowledge. Lots to look and learn if you want to pop in. Welcome to Kaleidoscope, where we are positive, daring and different. To our fantastic partners, Skills for Inclusive Growth and Australian Aid, Srilanka Life, CDB, The Daily Morning and Made by Her. Thank you for your support always. Don't miss out on our weekly program. Subscribe and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn.
You can now start a CDB iDeposit digital fixed deposit and experience a range of special benefits from CDB.
Looking back at the week that was on CDB Snapshot, some good news to kick things off. Inflation in April is down to 35.3% year-on-year, with food inflation also declining to 30.6%. Imports are recovering, with the March import bill up to $391 million from $204.3 million in February. The China Merchants Group ups its accumulated investments in Sri Lanka to reach nearly $2 billion. Srilanka Life opens its 25th green branch in Matale. The 6,000 square foot office is powered by a 25 kilowatt on-grid and 5 kilowatt off-grid solar power system, rainwater harvesting and wastewater recycling facility, as well as energy-efficient powering systems. India has the world's tallest railway bridge. The Chennai Bridge is 359 meters over the river and 35 meters taller than the Eiffel Tower. An art student in South Korea removes a banana which was taped to a wall as a work of art and eats it because he was hungry.
You focus on your goals. We will take care of the risks. Srilanka Life.
Welcome to Srilanka Life News Capsule. The Indian rupee is now a designated foreign currency in Sri Lanka. The addition of the INR into the foreign currency portfolio is built to add considerable benefits to trade, especially in tourism and some manufacturing sectors. But while all is gung-ho, what is the ground reality? Standard Chartered Bank just completed its first INR transaction for a multinational corporate client in Mumbai. So we invited the CEO of Standard Chartered Sri Lanka, Bingumal Thevaratantri, to the studio to get more clarity. Sri Lanka has started transacting in Indian rupees. What are the benefits that Sri Lanka will actually have doing this?
So Savithri, if I only look at trade in the early 90s, 1995, our trade volume with India was something like 400 million on the imports. Every year it has grown by 10%. Today in 2022, if you look at the numbers, $4.5 billion of trade on the import side alone. That's 26% of our trade volume. So moment you start trading with INR, when you're importing from India, there's a price advantage. That will significantly bring the price down for the products. So it's an added benefit for the consumer. On the investor side, they might see Sri Lanka as a cheap destination to manufacture using Indian raw material. Now, they'll always go to India for India. But if they want to manufacture in Sri Lanka and export to Africa for that matter, based on the treaties we have, they might see Sri Lanka as a destination to invest because there's a price advantage on the Indian raw material import side. On the inflows, tourism is the biggest. We used to have 30% of the tourists coming from India before the pandemic. 30% of 2 million was a significant number. Now just imagine India has 7% of the Indian population got passports. There's close to 100 million passport holders and we're only targeting 2 million tourists globally, right? So we should bring 2 million tourists from India. I mean, just imagine if you bring 2 million tourists from India, we used to get $4 billion of tourism revenue before the pandemic. We can make the 4 billion from India and you'll be paying in INR, gaining INR here, paying in INR. So it makes a lot of sense to commercialize INR in Sri Lanka from that perspective.
What about the challenges in actually transacting with Indian rupees?
Some of the Indian exporters might say, I don't want to invoice in INR because I import in USD and I have to manufacture and re-export, so I don't want to expose myself. So there will be a pushback on some of the exporters in India as well. That's one thing. When India becomes a base, a reserve currency and a bigger reserve currency, we have to do reserve management. Then we have to carefully watch the devaluation of INR and our exposure to Sri Lanka as using INR as one of the large reserve currencies. Initially it will be tough, but I believe that tourism is the way to go. A lot of the Indian tourists will prefer to bring their INRs, rupees and use it here. So it has to start somewhere.
What does ACB bring to the table in this context?
So we set up the bank in 1853 in Kolkata and Mumbai, and we were doing trade between India and China. So these are our home markets. So from that perspective also we have a role to play. And we really and India is a 3 trillion economy growing at 7%, and India will grow as a global leader in a multipolar world. India will play a significant role in the global economy, and we definitely want to partner with that.
And what's been happening over the last week with our markets? Bad news at the Colombo Stock Exchange this week. The all share price index drops by more than 4%, with the average daily turnover levels falling well below 1 billion rupees. But it's good news for Sri Lanka, with WTI oil prices falling by more than 5% to $71.50 per barrel on concerns about a downturn in the US economy. Gold prices remain steady, above $2,000 per ounce due to news of fresh crises in the US banking sector. Fashion's biggest night, the Met Gala, was this week, celebrating the life and work of late designer Karl Lagerfeld. The Lagerfeld-inspired looks ranged from the classic vintage to the outrageous head-turners. When the story of prisoner number 1056 was published, Roy Ratnavel became an instant celebrity. He was invited to speak on the book on various news shows, and the book is also at number 2 in Canada's bestseller list and number 8 on the Globe and Mail bestseller list. But what is read-worthy is that Roy, who is an executive vice president at one of Canada's largest investment firms and named one of the 50 best Canadian executives in 2020, was a prisoner at the Busa camp in Sri Lanka when he was only 17 in the aftermath of the Vadamarachi operation in 1987. His story is harrowing, but it also opens a chapter in Sri Lanka's history that many would like to forget. Roy speaks exclusively to Kaleidoscope this week from Canada, taking us through his prison time, his father's tragic death, his beginnings in Canada, and his climb to freedom and stardom. Welcome, Roy. Prisoner number 1056 is harrowing. It's astonishing and it's engaging. Why did you decide to publish your memoirs, and why now?
The reason I wanted to publish this book was for 3 reasons. One, first, to tell a story of a tortured teenager who fled war and oppression from his former birthland. And the second is to really give a voice to the next generation of Tamil men and women who are coming of age in Canada and other Western nations, to tell their story or their parents' story fleeing Sri Lanka. And third reason is to really celebrate freedom and democracy and what can happen when you give people freedom and democracy, and how society can thrive and function and be successful and be at peace at the same time.
Well, you've had to overcome almost impossible odds to get to where you are. How did you keep going when things just seemed hopeless?
My father sent me to Canada I remember him telling me very vividly when I was leaving from Karnataka Airport on April 18th, 1988, he said, I don't want you to survive, I want you to live. And so that was my mantra in a way. When I came here, I had to honor his word to build a life of prosperity and happiness. And I was single-minded on that objective.
So, how did you become prisoner number 1056?
Our ancestral homeland, this town is Point Pedro. In May of 1987, there was a operation called Operation Liberation that was orchestrated by the Sri Lankan Army. And during that time, I was rounded up along with 2,500 other prisoners and put on a cargo ship and sent to Busa camp at the age of 17.
So, tell me about your time in prison. What was it like and how did you get out?
Prisons are obviously a man-made hell, and I was there for a few months. One day, there was an announcement made that then Defense Minister Lalit Madali's wife, Srimani, was going to visit. I asked the opportunity to speak to her because my parents didn't know where I was, and I needed to get the message out. My father was a very good friend of a colonel who was in the army at the time, Colonel Dudley Fernando, and we were family friends. And I did remember his home phone number, believe it or not. So I gave that number to Srimani, and she was kind enough to pass the message on to my uncle Fernando, and he came and released me from the prison.
What was the most important lesson you learned in your time in prison?
That kindness will kill you in prison, and you have to become selfish in the way to survive, which is a harsh statement to make. The fact that I didn't care about anyone else and sort of found my way out of the prison in itself is what I call survivor's guilt. There are friends of mine who didn't make it out and they perished in the prison.
So you came to Canada at the age of 18 alone with next to nothing. If you can recall, what sort of mindset were you in then?
I landed in Canada on April 19th, 1988. 2 days later, on the 21st, my father was shot and killed by the Indian Army in the north while he was visiting Point Pedro. So my father's untimely death left me with the feeling that if I did well enough in life, somehow I could make up for the life he should have had. So that single objective became coal for my furnace of ambition. Because when he died, part of me died, but also other part of me became a fighter.
So what are you seeing of Sri Lanka now? What has changed and what is not?
I truly believe that the decline of Sri Lanka's moral fiber represents the single most serious threat to its survival. I'm afraid at the core, Sri Lanka hasn't changed since 1948 by electing the same type of politicians who play racial divisive games. They have brought this country to its knees, and it's so sad to see that. And it's basically the country's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
It all started with a great chili paste she made to fund a teaching project for children. Today on Life in 60 is made by her partner Dilini Karunaratne, the woman behind Manna Foods Candy.
Manna Food ආයතනය මුලින්ම පාරිභෝගිකයන් වෙතට පැමිණියේ චිලි පේස්ට් කප් එකකින්. එතනින් පාරිභෝගිකයන් වෙතට නොයෙකුත් ආකාරයේ බැදුම් වර්ග, චිලි පේස්ට්, එතකොට අච්චාරු මේ වගේ දේවල් වලින් මේ වෙනකොට වෙළඳපොලේ Manna Foods ඉන්නවා. ඒ වගේම මගේ ආයතනයේ යටතේ 8 දෙනෙක් විතර ප්‍රමාණයක් මේ වෙනකොට වැඩ කරනවා. ඒ අතර විශේෂයෙන්ම ගමේ මේ නිෂ්පාදන කටයුතු වලට ගමේ කාන්තාවන් තමයි පැමිණෙන්නේ. මම ගොඩාක් සතුටු වෙනවා. ඒ හරහා මට පුළුවන්කම ලැබිලා තියෙනවා ගමේ සිටින කාන්තාවන් පිරිසකට රැකියා අවස්ථා ලබා දෙන්න. Manna Food ආයතනයේ මේ රේන්ජ් එක වගේම විශේෂයෙන් කරපු හෙල්ත් රේන්ජ් එකක් තියෙනවා තල තෙල් වලින් කරපු. ඉතින් මේ හැම ප්‍රොඩක්ට් එකක්ම මට ඕන අපේ ලංකාවේ වගේම අපේ පිටරටවල වල ඉන්න අපේ කට්ටියටත් ඒ වගේම විදේශිකයන්ටත් මේක එක්ස්පෝර්ට් මාකට් එක වෙතට අරන් යන්න තමයි Manna Food ආයතනයෙන් මම විශේෂයෙන්ම බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ.
A tranquil and peaceful Vesak. We will see you next week.